Hi, this is your ArcaOS update for 2020 and into 2021. I'm Louis Rosenthal, managing member of ArcaOS. Most of you probably know who I am already, so I'll spare you the bio here. We have some exciting things brewing at ArcaOS. Please don't ever mistake a lull in our blog posts for any kind of lapse in energy. We prefer to post news when we have something important to say or to announce. Sometimes our work is at a much lower level than can be expressed in a couple of paragraphs, so we have a natural tendency to hold off just posting status updates. If you're curious about anything, please feel free to drop us a note using our web contact form or our sales email address, sales@arcanoa.com. One of the staff will be happy to answer your questions. Let's first cover where we are now and then where we're headed into 2021. In August, we released ArcaOS 5.06, which will really be the last 5.0 release. We did this specifically to address a couple minor issues we saw with the 5.05 production run, rather than try to release interim fixes to get the OS updated or installed fresh. Easier to just provide an updated ISO. We also knew that there would be several months before the next release, and the lesser of two evils was to release one last 5.0 build instead of making everyone wait. 5.1 will be the next minor point release for ArcaOS. We anticipate being able to release this sometime in middle to late 2021. It will go through our normal maintenance release cycle, 5.1.0, 5.1.1, 5.1.2, etc. We don't yet know how many of those there may be. When the 5.1 cycle completes, we will move to 5.2 and so on. We have no specific plans for what 5.2 will contain or any subsequent release at this time. That is not to say, and let me be clear about this, that we have any plans to stop producing new ArcaOS releases. We firmly believe that we have plenty more to update, enhance, and expand on the platform, and we are ready, willing, and able to continue development. Let's discuss some of the items we intend to include with the 5.1 release. As always, these are forward-looking statements and should not be taken as a commitment to release any of these. However, these are in our internal roadmap, and we will do our utmost to get them into the 5.1 release. That also means that some of these may not necessarily be in the 5.1.0 release, but may make it into subsequent 5.1 maintenance releases. We have some installer fixes and enhancements planned and in progress. As most of you know, we started the ArcaOS project knowing that we get one shot to make a first impression, and the installer is that first impression, so we take it very seriously, and we continue to refine it. In a first for the OS2 platform, we intend to provide support for install to and booting on systems which lack a traditional BIOS. UEFI, Unified Extensible Firmware Interface, is where all new hardware is headed, and in a few years, there may be no new machines with traditional BIOS. Supporting UEFI ensures that ArcaOS can remain viable into the future. We also are developing a solution for GPT disk layouts. While ArcaOS is currently limited to MBR disk layouts, which is up to 4 partitions including one extended partition with one or more logical volumes and disks of up to 2 terabytes in capacity, we all know that this is no longer realistic for today's storage devices or necessarily compatible in multi-boot configurations. Multiple terabyte disks are the norm today, and it is silly to only be able to utilize 2 terabytes on a 6 terabyte disk. GPT support gives us a path forward to utilizing these disks and eventually to creating and using partitions in excess of 2 terabytes as well. We will have our first national language versions of ArcaOS generally available. I'll talk about these a little later in the session. We plan to include the new Qt5-based browser, Falcon, assuming it is ready and stable for production use. Remember, this is a bitwise effort, and we cannot speak for them. However, if the browser is available, we will include it. We also would like to include updated builds of the Mozilla applications, as well as some other tools and software. Currently, ArcaOS ships with a Samba 3.6 based server and a 4.11 based client. It is our plan to bring the server and client into parity, which should help resolve differences in the Samba configuration file between the two major versions and make things more consistent across all connections. Ultimately, we want to include new Samba GUI tools as well. Continuing. In the way of new drivers, NVMe, the successor to AHCI, is becoming more and more popular. NVMe was specifically designed to take advantage of SSD technology. We currently have an NVMe driver in development. DT Audio currently allows WinOS2 audio to be routed to UniAud. We want to also provide a virtual Sound Blaster driver for DOS sessions. This will round out our support for retro gaming. UEFI support now allows us to run DOS and WinOS2 on more systems than we have been able to in quite some time as well. What's currently missing from the DOS and WinOS2 multimedia experience is audio support for systems which lack a DOS or WinOS2 driver, which today means most systems. DT Audio with the virtual Sound Blaster driver will fill that gap. We have more bundled apps to toss into the ISO, including Gotcha for quick screen captures from the print screen button, new calculators, and new text editors. We don't want to bloat the distribution, but we do want it to be immediately useful for most users, so productivity apps are a must. We may add a few small games as well. And finally, we will do away with the monolithic selective install facility from Warp 4 and replace it with small, specific selective installer apps for new keyboards, video driver switching, and so forth. If possible, we would like to add new Multimac WLAN drivers to the assortment of GenMac Wi-Fi drivers we already have. There should be little overlap between the two technologies as well. The new drivers should be focused on newer chips which are not supported by GenMac. This work has not really begun in earnest as yet, however, but it is still very much on our device driver roadmap. Even more stuff. Initially, the 5.1 release will include an upgrade facility to go from ArcaOS 5.0 to 5.1 in much the same way as the 5.0 update facility moves between 5.0 releases. It will not be necessary to reformat the system in order to upgrade to ArcaOS 5.1. Of course, things like switching from traditional BIOS to UEFI or from MBR to GPT will probably not be supported by the upgrade facility, as these imply some radical changes to the hardware configuration. Instead, the goal of the upgrade will be to take the hardware in its current state and just move the OS to the latest version. Later, we plan to introduce a migration facility to move existing ECS systems to ArcaOS without the need for a reformat and all of the data and configuration recovery which that entails. We may extend this migration to include later Warp 4 and MCP service levels. Likely the dividing line would be systems with LVM. Details for the migration component have not been worked out as yet, and this is not likely to be in the initial 5.1 release. As we progress through the 5.1 release cycle, expect more installer enhancements. As I've said, we get only one shot to make a first impression, and the better we can make that, the better the whole system looks, and the fewer installation complications we may have to address in the bug tracker. We'd like to include true desktop search to effectively locate text in PDFs and other data files. Recall looks like a good choice for this, and we are looking at updating to the most recent release, including the Qt5 GUI for it. As storage space continues to increase, the need for finding things quickly likewise increases. We view this as a necessary productivity tool for the platform. Recall also utilizes plugins for various data file types, and it is not out of the realm of possibility that we will develop and include one or more specific plugins to search, say, Lotus Smart Suite documents. OpenOffice is already supported, I believe. We have some more locale fixes and updates to do, so these should be included along the line as we go through the 5.1 release. Finally, let's talk briefly about national language versions. We're already building betas of German, Dutch, Spanish, French, Italian, Russian, simplified Chinese, traditional Chinese, Japanese, and Korean, with more languages planned, such as Brazilian Portuguese. We can add more based on demand. So if you have need, or better, know of a respective enterprise with a need for a number of licenses for a given language, please let us know. In terms of licensing, an ArcaOS 5.1 license will be language agnostic. What this means is that a single ArcaOS license may be used to install any ArcaOS 5.1 NLV. Related to my last point, as there are no non-English ArcaOS 5.0 releases, upgrading to 5.1 from 5.0 will be English only. So if you have need for, say, German, this will have to be a fresh install. There are probably 100 moving parts which I've left out of this update, so feel free to ask questions about specific items and I'll do my best to answer.
We are okay. Here we go. Let's check the questions. Luis, if there's any questions. I don't see on YouTube much. And
No one has any questions about the upcoming waffle maker that will be included with ArcaOS 5.1.
no question about it. I have one question about the upgrade tool from Warp 4.5 and Ecom Station to ArcaOS. Is it really needed? Do you have demand for that? There are. Yeah.
We really don't know at this point. I mean, there are still a number of ECS installations floating around out there. I mean, people continue to renew their drivers and software subscriptions. And as we know, those well-entrenched installations have a whole bunch of applications already installed on them. The original installation disks for which may or may not be easily found. So it makes it a bigger hassle to upgrade, to migrate, I should say, over to ArcaOS when there's all that stuff already installed and configured. So that's the idea. Okay. Okay. So here, well, let me run through it one more time, and hopefully this will clarify the situation. ArcaOS 5.0 is English only. So we handle updates from 5.0.0 to 5.0.1 to 5.0.6 with no problem. It's all the same language. We can update everything. 5.1, if someone wants to upgrade from 5.0 English to 5.1 German, there will not be an upgrade option to upgrade and change language. So because there is no 5.0 in German, there can't be a 5.0 to 5.1 upgrade in German. So German would have to be a fresh install. Now, once that's installed, updating to 5.1.1 German to German will work. But you can't update, for instance, not only can you not upgrade from 5.0.6 English to 5.1.0 German, but you wouldn't be able to update 5.1.0 English to 5.1.1 German. So the language has to be the same when you're doing an update or an upgrade. Does that help?
Yeah, okay, I get it because yeah, I understand how OS2 is not like it cannot switch language um, once it is installed. Yeah, you have to install it like the I don't know if you install it German, you cannot switch it to English. Yeah,
Correct.
okay, okay.
Correct.
There is another question. More about software. If there are any plans for Java 1.8, um, and if there is a possibility for that in the future.
Okay. Well, remember that Java is it's a NetLabs project that's been historically run by Bitwise, and I believe that they do have a desire to update to Java 8, which would be Java 1.8. We certainly would like to see that, but we have not made plans ourselves to get involved in that development. Um, Obviously, we realize that it's important to get something newer than Java 1.6, which is really starting to show its age at this point.
Okay. I'm checking for more questions, but I cannot find.
License question. Do I need subscription for each of my ArcaOS licenses? You need a subscription for any ArcaOS license that you wish to keep updated and for which you might need support. So if you buy 5 ArcaOS licenses um, and you only need support for one of those installations, I don't know why you would only need support for one and would know that ahead of time, but then you would only need to have one active subscription. But if you want to apply updates to all 5 of those, you would need an active subscription for each license. Let's see, what other questions have come in here?
There is a question about running ArcaOS on Macs that have Intel CPU. Well, there still has Intel CPU, but well, to be honest, I haven't tried anything of that, right?
We don't test on that hardware. It I have absolutely no idea. How's that? That's an honest answer. Any other roadmap questions here about what to expect in 5.1?
I guess that one of the more expected drivers for the community are the Wi-Fi drivers, and well, it says well, it, it's on the roadmap, but I don't know if there's any
Right.
progress.
Okay,
Or,
so
yeah.
let me just address for a moment what our logic is behind prioritizing one device driver over another device driver. Um, USB 3 for a long time was at the top of the priority list as more and more machines were coming out with USB 3 only. And we were running into issues where people couldn't even connect a mouse and keyboard to install the operating system. So that was at the top of the list. Now we've got USB 3 support working, XHCI support working, um, and that's out of the way in terms of getting it off the ground and getting it functional. So then the next question is, well, we had planned a new audio driver, we had planned Wi-Fi drivers, uh, and so we were really looking at prioritizing the Wi-Fi drivers next, and then the NVMe issue cropped up because more and more systems are shipping with NVMe controllers instead of AHCI controllers. Well, if you can't get the machine to, if you can't install the software on the machine, the operating system on the machine, not much else matters. So NVMe got jumped to the top of the stack. Once that's done and out of the way and working, I think that Wi-Fi drivers are pretty close to next in line there. Um, but it's all a matter of what do we need to get the machine booted and running first, then what do we need to connect to other things, and then what do we need to make the system more user friendly. So audio keeps getting pushed farther down the stack, and now of course that Paul has um, gotten back into working on UniAud, that's sort of taken a lot of the pressure off in terms of the new audio driver. So that's moved much farther down the stack. So that's kind of the way different things end up ahead of other things in the device driver roadmap. And everything, of course, is subject to change. Like NVMe sort of got pushed to the top of the stack just because that's the way we saw the direction of new hardware. Um, Likewise, obviously, the UEFI and GPT support has bubbled up to the surface to become more important for us. But Wi-Fi is still on the list. We're not giving up on developing new Wi-Fi drivers. We just have to get to that point.
Okay, there is another question if there will be a server-based version of ArcaOS like the old times there used to be um, Warp server for e-business. Um,
Um, we don't have plans for that right now in our roadmap, but if if the opportunity were to arise, for instance, one of the things on my personal wish list is an SAS driver for serial attached storage. Um, that's really a server technology. We might look at doing something like a server edition that would have such a driver in it, such a driver set. But at this point, that we have no specific plans to come out with a separate server edition. Now we may, let me just follow on to that. We may uh, uh, end up with something like a tablet edition if we find that we're able to run on um, more tablets that are available. Unfortunately, most of these devices are coming out with ARM chips in them, and we don't support the ARM processors. So we would have to see a change in the tablet market to support Intel processors in tablets, and then we might end up with something like a tablet edition. Um,
okay.
so more editions are possible. We don't have anything planned right now.
Yeah, we need more tablets with Intel chipsets or to change the kernel, which is very hard.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. Just a little thing like re-engineering the kernel.
There is another question if there will be a list of motherboards tested list for ArcaOS.
We add new items to the known working list as we go along. I guess we should spend a little more time surveying our customers to get some more feedback on those things. Um, I think really it's a matter of us spending a little more time keeping the list current. I know that David routinely updates that list as he is working on different things and keeps up with it. I was looking at it not too long ago myself, and I realized that I should probably add a couple things there. So I'll put that in my to do list.
Also on OS2 World, on the OS2 World wiki, I have also a list of the members that people reports on the forum. It's not official, but it can be also a good help for checking out the experience with different members.
I see there's a question about will DOS and WinOS 2 support be as good as DOSBox for games? Ideally, it will be better than DOSBox for games. Now, since I haven't run DOSBox in quite a while, I couldn't tell you I couldn't A/B that, but I will say that in UEFI mode, um, DOS and WinOS 2 run some things fabulously. And once we get the audio support working for those sessions, it will be just like the old days of running DOS and WinOS 2 applications on systems that had supported audio hardware. It's very smooth. The DOS and WinOS 2 support in UEFI mode is really very smooth.
I think that the only thing missing that is on the roadmap is the to have the DT audio with a sound blaster like emulation on the DOS virtual session, and with that it will be great for gaming, um, for retro gaming. It will be great to have that driver and well and finish the thing. Yeah.
So Nathan is asking, would the OS support RAID drives or add-in cards uh, that handle RAID drives? We do handle some RAID cards now, some RAID hardware now, um, but not SATA RAID. And we, much as I would like to see that RAID support, it's on our list, but it's down there with my wish list item for the SAS driver. Any other questions for 5.1 specifically? No one's got any questions about GPT support in 5.1 and what that means for disk drives going forward?
Well, that's very interesting. I don't know if you can talk about that. Um, I found it interesting because I like to sometimes to have dual boot on a machine, and I have to erase completely the other operating system like Windows to run GPT to remove GPT and put master boot record. I don't know if it's going to be easier to have dual boot machines with that.
Well, the idea is that once we have our initial GPT support, we'll be able to create a partition for ourselves on the disk and uh, and install to that partition on a GPT style disk and boot from it with no problem. So you'd be able to multi-boot between other GPT-aware operating systems. Um, that's the initial support, and that would give us. You would be able to create multiple uh, virtual drives um, When I say virtual drives, each GPT partition becomes a drive to us. So each GPT partition may be up to 2 terabytes in size. So you could create multiple 2 terabyte drives on one very, very large 6, 8, 10 terabyte GPT disk. And we would be able to boot from the installation on that. It'll be sometime after that we actually work out support for larger than 2 terabyte virtual disks, larger than 2 terabyte partitions. But it's in the plan. It's in the plan.
Just as general culture, which driver should we have to blame for not having 2 terabytes partition, more than 2 terabytes partition support? Should JFS should be updated, or any other drivers?
It's not the file system driver that's at fault. It's much lower level than that. So the JFS file system driver itself should be able to support much larger volumes than 2 terabytes. But other things, LVM itself, there's a whole list of things that need to be addressed in order to support partitions larger than 2 terabytes. That's a little out of my comfort zone. I don't do that type of development. So, but it's suffice it to say that that's a longer range goal for our GPT support than just being able to create partitions of 2 terabytes and install to those. Plans for a 64-bit ArcaOS? None, absolutely not. Not only would we need a 64-bit kernel for the operating system, but then all of the applications that we run are all still stuck at 32 bits. So it wouldn't really do us a lot of good without re-engineering a whole bunch of currently working applications for 64 bits. So I don't see a 64-bit ArcaOS as ever happening at this point. So long as processors continue to support running 32-bit code.
There is another question that says, well, rephrasing the question, it says, for ArcaOS without the kernel source code, is there any concern about possible security threats in the future?
Well, remember that the way our license works with IBM, we have the right to reverse engineer parts of the operating system where we don't have source code in order to provide binary patches. So we're not overly concerned about that. Clearly, it was something we discussed in some detail during the whole Heartbleed incident. But ultimately, we found that we were fairly well insulated. But we may have additional kernel patching to do to deal with things as they arise. We'll have to see.
I don't see any more questions. Just if you live near to a motorcycle shop, that is.
Will we support LVM-like assignment of drive letters for GPT? Yes, absolutely, absolutely. ArcaOS is very closely tied to LVM or vice versa. So any GPT support we provide has to be supported by LVM. So the tools that we have need to make LVM comfortable running in that environment. Nathan, you said earlier, my GPT support comes from a Netgear NAS box. I would like to do it locally, but OS2 doesn't support RAID. Well, yeah, there's the RAID thing. And I agree. Not having modern RAID support is a bit of a handicap for us. Um, it's on the list, so we'll see when we get there.
Just one little thing on your roadmap presentation. There was there was mentioned that you're going to support the new browser or include Falcon. It seems like according to the events of recently morning, is not going to be Falcon.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Whatever browser it is, whatever Qt5 browser it is, if it is GA ready, then we will include that in ArcaOS 5.1. And when I say include it, I don't mean that we're going to rip the Mozilla applications out. It would be an additional browser option, and we would probably install that as the default browser and leave Firefox as a secondary browser that people could install for themselves as well. Anything else?
No, I don't have any more questions here.
Okay,
All right, thanks.
you bet. So long again, everyone.
Okay,
Bye bye.
Bye bye.